Hey Bookworms, welcome back to my channel and to another review. Today I'll be talking about Pieces of Her by Karin Slaughter. I've recently read another book by Karin Slaughter, The Good Daughter, and I also reviewed it, and they're both written in the same year, so that's that. Pieces of Her is about a woman called Andy who always had a pretty good relationship with her mother, Laura. But what started out as a regular day for both of them just hanging out becomes a disaster as something really horrible happens, and Andy sees a side of Laura that she never even dreamed existing. And now they're both in danger, and Andy has to flee and make sense of everything that happened and save both her and her mother's lives. I think that the worst thing about Pieces of Her was the fact that I read it immediately, pretty much, after finishing The Good Daughter, which only made it clear just how similar both books are. Seriously, the beginning of both books are so identical in theme and characters that I had this theory that Karin Slaughter had this idea for a scene that could go in two different directions, two different plot lines, and she actually did that. One direction was in The Good Daughter and the other one was in Pieces of Her. Now, granted, thriller authors do have their own style, and I admit even my beloved Agatha Christie had some books that looked very, very similar. However, this is one negative point toward Pieces of Her, that it's just felt like a rehash of The Good Daughter. I only read one more book by her called Criminal, but I can only assume that in her other book that I haven't read there are other similarities. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's first talk about the positives of the Pieces of Her, which pretty much are exactly the same positives as in The Good Daughter and Criminal. The fast pacing of the book and the element of the impossible mystery. I feel like I'm repeating myself because I talked about it in my two previous reviews on Karin Slaughter's books, but she has this impossible mystery element to the book. It's not just there is a body, someone is being murdered, let's find out who it is. It's a bit more intriguing. Here we have the question of Laura's past and her identity, and it immediately gets you hooked up and you're like dying to know what the hell is going on. Unfortunately, this positive is also a negative that I will be mentioning in a moment because this is pretty much the end of the positives, so let's get to the downsides. As I just mentioned, the book does set a very interesting, intriguing mystery and you're kind of like dying to know what the solution is. Unfortunately, very quickly the book goes in a totally different direction. The book has two timelines, which is not an idea that I like, but okay, it's a matter of taste. One of Andy in the present and the other takes place in the 80s. And at first I thought that the 80s timeline was just there for some exposition or teasing, but I quickly learned that this is going to be the majority of the book. Now, it wasn't interesting timeline, but still, it wasn't really what I expected. I almost felt cheated when I realized that we're not going to follow Andy as much as we're going to follow Jane, the protagonist from the 80s. And since I mentioned the Good Daughter ripoff, the 80s timeline of the book focuses on the theme of misogyny, which was a Criminal ripoff, just not as well written. I honestly felt bored of the 80s timeline and I thought it should have taken a backseat to the major plot line about Andy. And if not, at least, don't cheat us by showing us such a great, wonderful, interesting mystery only to make it less than half of the plot. I mean, I didn't really measure it, but I felt like the 80s plot line was way longer and took the majority of the book. It was way longer than it should have been, in my opinion. Other than that, the book just felt underwhelming. The plot twists were really obvious. The characters weren't as fleshed out as they would have been in, I don't know, a story with one timeline and some flashbacks maybe. And there's also zero character development, even though the book pretends that there is. At the end of the book, Andy behaves in a totally different way than at the beginning, but there's actually nothing that would cause her to do so. Yes, she goes outside of a comfort zone and she faces dangers, but I just didn't really see any reason for the change within her. Another issue is the cheap psychology. I felt like the theme here is pretty interesting. The way that kind of cult leaders in a way attract people to them, the psychology of abusive relationship, the power that some people have on other people. But as much as it was interesting, I didn't feel like it was done very well. Like, we have the main character who knows that she's being controlled by a cult leader type of a person, unlike the reality where most people in abusive relationship don't really understand there's something wrong there. And because I like nitpicking, let's nitpick. The book should have ended at least 5 pages before it actually had. And it really drags at times, guess in which timeline. I also felt that there were a few plot holes, mostly related to the characters' motivations. If you look backward on what the aim or the motivation and the goal of some of the characters are, it kind of don't really make sense what they did. And also, as a person who's really known to have a lot of knowledge about the themes she's writing about and putting a lot of effort in the details, Karin Slaughter made the rookie mistake of referring to an obvious psychopath as a sociopath. This is something that takes 2 seconds to Google, the difference. So eventually, if you've never read anything by Karin Slaughter, you will not notice the similarities to her other books, so maybe you will be less disappointed. However, if you really never read anything by Karin Slaughter, I would recommend reading Criminal, which is not only more interesting and better written, but also deals with the themes of misogyny and the psychology of abusive relationships a lot better. So I think underwhelming is a good way to describe this book, and I think the 3 books by Karin Slaughter were more than enough for me. If I ever read other books by her, I first of all need to wait a while, but then maybe to go to one of her older books. If you have any recommendations, write down below. Basically, I think that in a few weeks' time, I will not really remember anything from pieces of her, which should really tell you all you need to know about my opinion of this book. And that's it for my review, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, and also write down in the comment section if you read pieces of her, if you like it, if you have any recommendation for other Karin Slaughter books. And the comment question of this video is, name the one author that you kind of feel that all of her or his books are pretty much the same. For me, it has to be Harlan Coben. Like I said, every thriller writer had their own similarities and patterns, but Harlan Coben is the one author. I say that the differences between his books are like the differences between Roman and Greek mythology. It's basically the same, exactly the same, just different names. So write down which author you think always write the exact same books. Anyway, guys, thank you again for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you dare, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.